It is an honor to welcome you to this space of dialogue, of community, of action. And today we gather as the community of the Economy of Francesco, a global movement of young economists, change makers, and entrepreneurs united by the conviction that a fairer economy is not just possible but urgent. The Economy of Francesco community is a community of over 1,000 young members in over 120 countries. And it started, or it was called by Pope Francis in 2019 to reimagine the economy and to work towards a more human economy, always inspired by the teachings of St. Francis of Assisi. Today, we join to talk, to hear, to embrace, to learn, and to work together with wonderful panelists such as Luigino Bruni, Helen Alford, Fadi Chehadé, and Mariana Reis. Today, we are guided by a timely and prophetic light given by Pope Leo's 14th recent Encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas. And this text is not a theoretical archive, but an urgent appeal illuminating Catholic social teaching for our digital age. Broadly speaking, the encyclical addresses our most present modern challenges: the rapid rise of artificial intelligence, the risks of digital dehumanization, the defense of labor dignity against unchecked automation, and the need to disarm hateful rhetoric to build a civilization of love. Pope Leo XIV urges us to approach technological progress with ethical discernment, reminding us that no algorithm can ever replace the sacred value of an embodied human life, personal community, and the universal destination of goods. We would like to thank all of you that have joined us in this webinar today, especially today that the Catholic Church celebrates the Corpus Christi, which makes this gathering even more special. When we celebrate that we are not a collection of disconnected individuals, but organs of a bigger living organism, a community. Magnifica Humanitas calls for a grassroots transformation from the base, from the individuals that hold the divine dignity that was given by God. Today, we are joined by great panelists, by friends of the Economy of Francesco. And I will present them one by one right now. So we are joined by Sister Helen Alford, who, besides being a very good friend of Economy of Francesco, is also the president of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. She's a Dominican sister and a leading scholar in business ethics and Catholic social teaching, serving on the scientific committee of the Economy of Francesco. We are also joined by Fadi Chehadé. He is an internet entrepreneur and former CEO of ICANN, currently managing partner of FS Capital and chairman of the Pax Foundation, with extensive experience in technology, digital governance, and international cooperation. We are also joined by Luigino Bruni, who is an economist, historian of economic thought, full professor at LUMSA University, vice president of the Economy of Francesco Foundation, and a leading voice in civil economy and economic ethics. And we are also joined by Mariana Reis Maria, economist and assistant professor at UNICAM. She is specializing in ecological economics, innovation, and sustainable development. She is also a member of the Youth Assembly of the Foundation and a member of the Scientific Committee of the Economy of Francesco. So with these great panelists, we will have our webinar today, and the webinar will have the following structure. So after I finish speaking, which hopefully will be soon, we will give the floor to our panelists, starting with Sister Helen, followed by Fadi Chehadé, then Mariana Reis, and we will finish with the words of Luigino Bruni. Each one of them will have 15 minutes to share with us. And if any of you have any questions during their presentations, please share them in the Zoom chat. There, we will identify one of these questions and we will have the space for each of the panelists to answer them after each of the presentations. They will have 5 minutes, so we would ask you to be very concise with the questions that you make. After all the presentations, we will open the space for a Q&A, that it's going to be a more of a dialogue space. And then we will go to the concluding remarks. So with that said, I would like to give the floor to Sister Helen. Welcome, Sister Helen. It's always so wonderful to be here with you. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Ricardo, for that very gracious introduction. So I'm very, very happy to be here. It's an honor, as always, to be with all the exciting thinkers in Economy of Francesco. I also am very happy to see some of the people in the postdoc program. I might say something about that a bit later when we're dealing with the questions. Anyhow, I would like to start my comments with some of the words that Chris Olah, the co-founder of Anthropic, said in the press conference presenting the document Magnifica Humanitas to everybody. And very near the beginning, he said, every frontier AI lab, including Anthropic, operates inside a set of incentives and constraints that can sometimes conflict with doing the right thing. And then he gives a few examples of these incentives. And he says, no matter how sincerely any of us intend to do the right thing, and I believe many of us do, we will always be influenced by those incentives. So you really get a strong impression at the beginning that there's something kind of immutable and fixed about these incentives, whereas it contrasts so much with all the rest of the talk where, he's talking about bringing a fictional character to life and all the amazing things we could do and all the things we have to try to do and all these new things and innovations we need. But there isn't any innovation with regard to the structure of these incentives. These are like something real, like something really out there that we just have to deal with, And I want to come back to that a few times, at least at the end, and then move to a second point, which is to do with technological development, because I'd like to say something about what we're talking about here in this encyclical, because of course it has two big chapters on AI and technological development, talks about a lot of issues connected with them. But I'd like to also see it in context of earlier developments. And the papacy, and not only the papacy, a lot of other people who've been involved in trying to understand history of technological development would often split technological development into two basic groups. We might be able to be a bit more sophisticated and split it even more, but at least two groups for now is good enough. I think it's clear enough for the 15 minutes I have. So the first kind of line of technological development would be called by Pope John Paul II in his 90th anniversary document that he wrote for Rerum Novarum. This is, of course, 135 years this year. So in 1981, 90 years after Rerum Novarum came out, he talked about technology in this way, using the term man's ally, or the human being's ally in work. And he uses four verbs to describe what it means to be man's ally. He says that technology can facilitate, can perfect, can accelerate, and can augment what human beings do at work. And especially that second verb, perfect, for a Pope who had been trained here in the Angelicum, where I'm speaking from now, with the Dominicans, with a Thomist background, to say that something could perfect human work, that is very, very strong language. That means in the Thomist kind of thought world, that bringing it to its fulfillment, bringing it to what it could be, So that's strong language. In Caritas in Veritate, Pope Benedict at number 69 says, in technology, seen as the product of his genius, man recognizes himself and forges his own humanity. So again, this is a really powerful statement. We somehow see ourselves reflected in the technology. It's the product of our genius. And we forge our own humanity in this technology. Laudato Deum talks about how we can even reshape our environment. This is Pope Francis now. We can reshape our environment in very positive ways. He talks about how indigenous communities have done that. That's number 27. And in this encyclical, this would corroborate with the image of rebuilding the walls, the Nehemiah image, you know, the walls of the city which create the frame, create the protective area around a social life, allow that social life to be facilitated, perfected, accelerate, all those other things that we were saying. The Nehemiah image connects to this kind of idea about technological development. In a broader sense, you will see a whole tradition of technological development called human-centered, which has had a very important engineers involved in it, that's trying to do this kind of development. And I would also like to make reference to a much earlier thinker, Lewis Mumford, who is an American anthropologist who wrote in 1934 a book called Technics and Civilization. If you put that into a Google search engine or somewhere on the internet, you can find it. It's available on the internet. And he talks about these different types of technological development. He calls this type biotechnics. It's decades before we get biotechnology. The whole idea of the biotechnics is it's a form of technological development that's inserted into a way of life, making that way of life more rich, more augmented, more all those sorts of things that we were talking about, those verbs up to now. So that's one line. Then the other line, of course, you can see where this is going. In Pope John Paul II's encyclical, he calls almost man's enemy. And of course, he calls it almost because anything bad can only exist because it's parasitic on something good. Existence itself is good. If it was 100% bad, it wouldn't exist because existence in itself is good. So bad things are always parasitic on the good. Hence why he says that technology can be our ally and it can almost be our enemy. It can't be 100% like that. And he uses another 4 verbs to describe what that means. He says the technology can supplant human beings. It can take away from human beings things like satisfaction and creativity. It can deprive human beings of employment, for instance, he says, and it can enslave human beings. So you can see he's got these 4 verbs, one with technology as an ally and one as almost the enemy. In Caritas in Veritate, Pope Benedict talks about the supremacy of technology, this kind of technological, where it sits on top. It's the kind of king. It's the center of everything, and everything else has to serve this system. Life becomes a resource for the technology instead of the technology being inserted into the life and making the life more beautiful, rich, and productive. In Laudate Deum, Pope Francis talks about reality, goodness, truth, automatically flowing from technological and economic power. So this system, this kind of connection of technology and economics, is producing reality, we think. You know, it's the source of goodness. It's the source of truth. It's really taken over. It's become the center of everything. This is what in the human-centered technological tradition would be called technocratic design, or technocentric design, and what Lewis Mumford calls monotechnics, as opposed to his biotechnics. So just you get a sense of some of the different terms that are around these 2 ideas. Now, what all these thinkers will say is that these 2 forms of technological development coexist. They go forward together. It's not like there's one or the other. They're usually always present. One form can be dominant. Okay. And Lewis Mumford, that's why that book is very interesting, and I recommend you to read it, talks about different periods in human history where the different forms have been dominant. In our period, the technocentric form is dominant ever since the Industrial Revolution, but it's not completely absent other forms of technological development. We might say, for instance, today, the green tech, which is trying to find forms of technological development which are sustainable and inserted into the ecosystem of life. This would be an example of the first kind, technology as our ally. Now, what kind of pushes things one way or the other? Well, this is where I want to come back to the incentives that Chris Olah was talking about. These incentives in a capitalistic market system, tend to push us towards this technocentric technological development. When what I want to emphasize with you is that is not at all pre-programmed in the technology. We could have different forms of technological development. It's the capitalistic incentive system that's pushing us in that direction. And this is why Olar says, we're subjected to these incentives. We can't do anything about it. You have to help us try to do the right thing, even though we have to face those incentives, kind of thing, he's saying to the Pope and to the church. And so I want to finish by saying what Economy of Francesco is trying to do to rethink economics, to rethink the way we think about economics. It's not a natural system. We're not just stuck with it like we might be stuck with, I don't know, the weather or the kind of beings we are or something like this. But we can modify it. We can have a different kind of economic system. And that's, of course, what Economy of Francesco is about. Thinking about how we could modify systems so that we could shift the incentives so that they favor much more that first form of technological development rather than the second form. That is a real contribution to carrying forward what Magnifica Humanitas is talking about, to safeguarding human life in the face of AI and producing an AI which is really worth the time to produce it, which is actually going to, as Pope John Paul said, facilitate, perfect, accelerate, and augment, our life. So I think that's all I would like to say, Ricardo. I hope I'm inside my time.
Yes, thank you very much, Sister Helen, and no, as good as always. Yeah, no, I would like to ask you regarding what you just mentioned. So when they came to the Pope and said, like, help us address these problems, and I would like to go with that because also last time talking with Cardinal Czerny, we were talking how the church has to adapt to the times. And also in one of the paragraphs of Caritas Humanitas, we mentioned that the call from the Pope to work in the grassroots, not to be active and not to wait for the systems to change. So in that regard, I would like to ask you, Sister Helen, if you could go a little bit deeper in how we as individuals can go against this in pushing for a change in the structure and not waiting for the structure to change before we make an amendment.
Well, when you ask a practical question, then we always need to take into account the local circumstances that our people are in. So it's very hard for me to say anything that sort of can work for everybody all of the time. I mean, I do think that the general response to that sort of thing would be to say we have to develop the virtue of prudence. We have to be able to think through all those general ideas in terms of our local situation and try to realize the good as much as we can in those local circumstances. That's the sort of most general thing I could say that could apply to everybody, but then they have to do their bit. I can't fill in all the details of that. But the other thing I would say is, Pope Francis would often say that we're not in an era of change, we're in a change of era. And I think this is connected with the fact that we have kinds of problems now, which are thinking that we've inherited from the modern period, which is very focused on individual human freedom, which isn't at all transcendent, doesn't make a connection with God. It tries to work everything out in this worldly way of doing things. There's a series of characteristics we could point out about modern thinking. The kinds of problems we have to deal with now are mostly either social problems or they're systemic problems, like the ecological ones. And starting from a way of thinking that puts individual free choice at the center is like trying to play a game of like netball or something with one hand tied behind your back. You just don't have all the resources you need to deal with it properly. So the work that's going on in Economy of Francesco and that other people are trying to do to rethink the framing of economic. It sounds like a big thing. It sounds like dealing with something that's way away from people's concrete everyday life. But I think it will have very, very important impact on what is going on in everyday life. And so this is why I want to emphasize it in our webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sister Helen. And now we will move to our next panelist. I would like to give the word to Fadi Chehadé. So please, Fadi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you, Sister Helen, for this wonderful expose you've shared with us. So, I am a computer scientist by training. I was trained in artificial intelligence by the man who invented the word artificial intelligence. John was my professor, and he helped me learn about this technology in the mid-'80s. I have since built a lot of technology using what I learned, and I have succeeded in starting from scratch 3 companies and selling them to IBM and Oracle and different technology leaders. So I wanted to start with this so I can scare you with my background. I come from that side of the house. Look, I've lived in California for many years, and I'm familiar with the culture that has grown in California. The culture that has created these 5 very powerful people that run 5 companies that right now are pretty much directing artificial intelligence in the world and buying massive amounts of energy to essentially feed this technology. I'm familiar with that culture. I lived in that culture, and I know it. And I think there is a moment with every technological development that is now a tsunami. I mean, AI started in 1957 at Dartmouth. I mean, this is not a new thing. And when I studied it in the mid-'80s, it wasn't a new thing. It just happened now because, as John said, you need data, you need computing power, and you need algorithms. And in the 1980s, we only had the algorithms. There was no internet. We didn't have the data. And the computing power was limited. When those 3 things happened, the tsunami occurred. And so that's what we're living today. And I want to share with you 2 things that will hopefully spread some hope. I'm an engineer, so I'm very practical. So I'm a practitioner. I build AI as we speak, and I am a capitalist as well. I have an investment company. So I live in the world that I think could shape this, as Sister Helen said, one way or the other. And so let me share, at least with you, with humility, the things I'm trying to do to shape it one way. The first is to remind you that we need a framework to understand how to contain this very powerful technology. And that framework is really not well defined yet. In 1957, in July, a group of scientists met in Pugwash, Canada. They were all guided by a manifesto that Oppenheimer and Einstein had written to say, we have this new thing called nuclear physics. It's powerful. We should agree on a framework to contain it. This Pugwash meeting, which lasted 20 days or so, included the top scientists of nuclear physics, Oppenheimer and others, from the Soviet Union, China, the US, and Europe. And they together built a framework to contain this technology. That framework became the non-proliferation treaties much later. This happened again in 1975 in Asilomar, California, where all the geneticists who had started seeing the power of genetics said, hold, we all need to get together and agree on a framework to define how genetics will serve humanity. And the work they did in Asilomar, those scientists, ended up being, until today, the framework that NIH, the National Institute of Health in the US, but also a lot of other global institutions use to define the guardrails around using genetics. The same happened again in the late 90s for the internet. Same thing. There was a meeting in the White House that was presided over by no other than the man who invented the internet, Al Gore. That's why Al Gore says, I invented the internet, because he was at that meeting and they defined the framework by which the internet will be governed. That framework produced organizations like ICANN, which I led for many years, and other organizations that govern the infrastructure of the internet and ensure that the guardrails are there for humanity. Today, we need a pugwash for AI. This is a moment where all the scientists need to get together. The scientists first, because they understand or think they understand, because this is very difficult to understand, unlike other technologies we built. But at least those scientists that understand AI need to be asked to come together in a pugwash moment and define the framework of how we manage this technology. And we are working to set up that meeting as we speak. So that's one framework that is missing, and I gave you some historical background so you appreciate why this is needed by the scientists. Remember, the stakeholders in this will be scientists, will be policymakers, will be business people, companies, civil society, and each one of us to a degree. All of us are the stakeholders. But the scientists created it, and they need to start themselves by giving their understanding to create this framework. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention to you. On a completely different level, and now I'm going to link to the wonderful encyclical that we have been gifted in the last few days. Look, every time we have something very powerful like AI permeate the planet, two things start happening very quickly. The first is people pushing governments and institutions to make laws and norms and policies so that we can have enforced capabilities to keep this thing under control. And that's happening already as we speak at the level of, in the US, in California, it's happening. Not so much in DC these days, but it depends where you are in the world. Europe, of course, issued the AI Act. So there are many places trying to put norms and policies that are enforceable. That's the first thing that happens when a powerful technology like this comes. The second thing that happens is that corporate leaders start self-governing themselves with codes of conduct. When I was working at the World Economic Forum in Davos, we used to bring together corporate leaders and get them to at least check on each other's codes of conduct. So if Exxon or Esso was doing something to limit its capabilities, hopefully the folks from Shell would listen in and see if they would also follow and do their own codes of conduct. Self-governance works. It's not sufficient, but it works. I just give you the best example in front of all of us. Dario at Anthropic stood up to no less than the Department of Defense of the United States and said, you can't use my technology for these reasons. And of course, the outcry was, well, who are you to tell us how to use it? He said, no, this is my technology. I'm going to tell you how to use it. It's contractual, but moreover, it's my code of conduct. Autonomous assassinations of people are just not ways you're going to use my technology. So codes of conduct are very important. I established one in my company, and I make sure that people use the technology with that code. So that's the second thing that happens. Now, what I'm about to tell you, which I discovered when I was at ICANN, in the thick of governing the internet, that those two things are not sufficient. We go to them because we think it's either a government enforcing something or a company. And this time we have only really 5 companies that control all of that. And God help us, that their leaders have the right thing to do. But to me, this is no longer sufficient. AI will permeate so many horizontal and vertical sectors of life. We need more than this. So what is it, the more that we need? And here comes this beautiful encyclical that has a very powerful component that touched me on our responsibility. We individually, each one of us, who designs AI, who promulgates AI, who uses AI, where is our responsibility in all of this? Now, what does that mean? It means I used to put policies for the internet, and I used to watch different companies and individuals apply them differently. The same policy can be applied very differently. The difference between two implementers was often a human decision on how to implement that technology. And as a result of this simple realization, I've been working with some friends in Italy over the last year, and in fact, after a discussion with Pope Francis himself about this, on an oath. If any of you here are doctors, you're quite familiar with the Hippocratic Oath. This is an oath that every physician takes because they handle matters of life and death. And so for thousands of years, every physician in the world, once they started their profession, raised their hand and said, I will do no harm. We need an oath for AI. We need people to raise their hand and say, I will preserve the relationship, the important relationship between what I design and I use and the human spirit and its dignity. I have responsibility to retain personal judgment in how I build my AI. I want to make sure that my AI promotes peace, not divides people, that it has a very clear component of equity and justice in how the technology is deployed. When people deploy AI algorithms in hospitals that prioritize patient care and use data that presupposes things about Black people, and that is happening in hospitals today, and Black people get excluded, a human made that decision without thinking about the justice of what they're doing. And then a duty of care to place the most vulnerable, to keep them at the center of what we're designing in AI. And finally, wisdom, the wisdom to understand that I don't know everything and I need to keep learning. I can't deploy AI and forget it. I have to keep learning and make sure. So these 7 principles will be in an oath that we are preparing. And I've been meeting with university presidents to discuss this. And it is remarkable how much our young people need and feel they need agency over this technology. And the oath gives them some responsibility, but also some agency. And that's these 2 practical things, the pugwash meeting for the scientists and the oath, which we're trying to promulgate across campuses worldwide, will hopefully be 2 small things we can add to humanize this immensely powerful technology that will change a lot of our lives. So with this, I'll hand it back to you, and hopefully I've been able to give you hope in the midst of this very important moment. Ricardo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fadi. It was a truly wonderful presentation. And I have a question for you. So when we talk about AI, I think many of us don't realize how fast this revolution is happening. I think many of us have not came to the understanding on how big this is as of now. Uh, Many times this is compared to a boat that is going on an open water in a very fast pace. We cannot stop it, but we have to steer it. And I'm saying these words because I would like to ask you about the frameworks that you were mentioning. The frameworks because I understand it as frameworks in different levels, in levels of those that are the scientists that develop it. Because last time I was in another meeting and they were saying that now AI is being studied by neuroscientists. So it has gone that deep. So when we talk about different frameworks, how can we work, or how can we invite other voices from ethics, from theology, from human sciences, from anthropology to this discussion, and how can we make this discussion to be in the right time for us to be able to contribute to this matter?
Thank you, Ricardo. This is an excellent point. This is a multi-stakeholder discussion. And in fact, by the way, in Pugwash, Canada, the scientists did invite ethicists. They did invite philosophers. They did invite anthropologists who were also supporting the discussion of the scientists who understood the limits and the dangers of that technology. And I think the same needs to happen here. We need to start with the core of scientists, but we cannot stop there. We have to very quickly add the voices, because this is very much an anthropological matter as well that will affect humanity in so many ways. So we will have all those voices added and participating. And then even after all of this is added, the outcome of a framework needs to be translated into something. You know, it will be translated just like Pugwash's outcome eventually became the non-proliferation treaties, and it was enforceable. The same thing will happen. We start with a framework, and then that framework is enriched by the voices of people and of different disciplines. And then once that's established, it needs to be moved into the realm of frameworks that are legally enforceable on companies. And this is important, Ricardo, because I'm very worried about the concentration of power in the AI space today. We are truly seeing something I haven't seen. When I was working on internet technologies and other, it was much more distributed, because of the massive needs of energy. I was at a meeting in Munich a few weeks ago where some of the top European entrepreneurs were there. It was an incredible meeting. And without naming names, a very, very, very prominent American technology leader came to talk to them and basically told them that they have no power anymore, that a few people in America and a few people in China control this, and you guys just need to do what we tell you to do, basically. It was a very powerful message, and people were moved by the sheer power that was being communicated by a very prominent person. And I see this, and we at least in this community, we should all pray for this, because this concentration of power is immense. And if the hearts are not in the right place, and so we need to move quickly with both creating a framework that becomes hardened around those people as soon as we can. And not just a framework of words, but a framework of actual guardrails that are well defined, so that people start behaving within those guardrails, and then we need to enforce them. That's one activity. And then the oath activity will just make sure that every engineer working at those 5 companies, and hopefully thousands of others that are implementing those things, have in them at least the question before they push the button deploy to say, is this adhering to the principles I raised my hand and committed to? That's my hope. But I have hope, Ricardo. I don't want you to feel the gravitas of this moment makes me worry. The only thing that will save all of this is our humanity. It's us celebrating this, what I see on the screen, our community, our ability to stand and be heard. And we will be. Back to you, Ricardo. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fadi. And I would like to invite everyone to share questions in the chat. Then at the end in the Q&A section, we can have a more open conversation. But now I would like to give the word to Mariana Reis Maria. Welcome, please. The floor is yours, Mariana.
Thank you, Ricardo. Hi, everyone. What an honor to be here. Actually, this is the beauty of the UF community, to be here with these amazing people. It's a privilege. I would like to thank you, the executive team, at first for bringing us in this reflection. And today, I would like to share some personal, but also some collective thoughts on behalf of the UF community, especially from members from the assembly that kindly shared with me some thoughts. Although I'm fully responsible for all the words that I'm spreading here. First, I would like to share that in my talk, I will focus on the encyclical aspects that hit me the most. In a place of a woman, a young woman, an economist, a professor, a Latin American citizen, and of course, a member of the UF community. The first point that hit me the most and is that Pope Leo not only presented us the diagnosis of our contemporary area very well and detailed, but he also invited us to assume or actively assume our role in this process. I can hear, when I was reading it, I could hear a sound wake up. So we are facing many changes in these processes, but actually we are not making part of it as we should or as we could. In this, I feel like many of us are sleeping in this process, or we are feeling an inertia because of it feels like we can do anything. So this caught my attention deeply because as a young economist, I teach many young that will become new economists in the future. I see my generation and many of us in the community as well. We are working, we are studying, we are taking care of our family. We are trying to be good friends. We are trying to answer everybody in WhatsApp. Is trying to stay healthy, try to sleep 8 hours a day. So in a place of privilege, because I'm totally conscious that I am a privileged woman, this seems too much. Sometimes it seems that we don't have the time to think. We are not allowed to think. So the things keep happening and this process is accelerating and we are not taking the roles we should, because this is defining not only our present, as Pope Leo tells us in the Encyclical, but especially our future. And it also, there is a phrase that Pope Leo says that we are making our lives projects to be optimized. So this really touched me because we are becoming efficient life. We are trying to turn our lives into efficiency projects. Well, and as I said, I'm privileged because back into my reality, I can say that many women at my age work 7-6 days a week at precarious jobs. They spend hours on public transportation just to raise their children and pay rent. They aren't given the time to take care of their own health, much less to question this economic engine. Just to give you an example from my reality again, while the world is discussing the 4-day work week, Brazil has just approved a bill last week to the 5-day working. week. So we, as Pope Leo tells us in the Encyclical, especially in the chapter 4, in many parts of the world, we are still experiencing a massive technology transformation in the job market, while we still coexisting with extremely precarious forms of work. So this stands out for me in the Encyclical. I think it's a very important reflection that we have to make. And this performance society, this Babel syndrome that he tells us, distracts us from what really matters, building a fair future where the technology will serve to the integral development and not the opposite. This efficient society constantly tells us that we are not sufficient, that we don't have enough, turning the productivity into an end in itself. Well, the artificial intelligence, it stands out because this transformation is occurring in an accelerated path that we are not able to fully digest. That's true. But this is not new. As Fadi mentioned about the waves of technological transformation, historically, we can say that this disconnection between progress of the common good has led us to systematically build sacrifice zones. This is a very interesting concept that's being developed here in Latin America because it seems that we can consider some lives, some human beings, as less valuable, especially when they are vulnerable communities and our common home as well, that is also seen as disposable in this system. This is very angustiating for me because also the solutions presented are often deeply paradoxical. For example, while we need to active a global energy transition, for example, electrifying mobility, in the global south, this is leading to increasing communities being displaced for their territories or facing several severe water crises, due to intensive mining for resources like batteries or solar panels. But if this technology is not demonizing the technology, it's not saying that we don't need a transition, we need it. But if it's not questioned, if the purpose is not questioned, or if we are not focusing this in the common good, it will only serve to a technocrat paradigm, as Pope Francis told us when he was writing the encyclicals. In chapter 3, Pope Leo also reinforces that technology is not neutral. And because this immense power that is held by those who own it causes a very dangerous tendency. It increases the risk of distorted development that give rise to new dependencies, as I have already said, exclusions, manipulations, and inequality. That's why Pope Leo asks for regulation, but this is not enough. We have to disarm artificial intelligence. And this, for me, I think it's present in one of the most beautiful paragraphs of the encyclical, that is the 110, that he is asking for disarming AI. That is not only a military concept, it's a cognitive, he says, and economic necessity. In chapter 3, he highlights that we are allowing technology monopolies to control minds, hearts, and destinies. And again, I will bring back to my reality, because I don't know if you are aware of, but the addiction to online betting platforms here in Brazil, it's already a health problem. These platforms have combined predatory algorithms designed to addict users, many of them who are already vulnerable socially and economically, saying. And they are also hiring digital influencers, this category, to attract new targets. So we are seeing many families being destroyed by gambling habits. So just to start to ending this, the Pope invited us to resist this dehumanization of that technology is, as Sister Ellen said, pushing us into this place of being almost enemy of the human being. So to disarm this technology is not rejecting technology, but preventing it from dominating humanity. It means, as Pope says, freeing technology from monopolist control and open it to a public debate. As Fadi said, we have to arrive together in a place, scientists, people who develop AI, but also the society, because this is our future. We have to put social movements, young people into these processes as well. And to finish, another dimension that touched me the most, that is, he started in introduction, but he enforces, Pope Leo, he enforces it throughout the test, is this homogenization and individualization that these technologies are promoting. Pope Francis has taught us that a new economy is only possible through fraternity, communion, and mutual care for each other and for our common home. It requires the beauty of diversity, where we can learn from our differences. Now, Pope Leo invites us to recall the civilization of love proposed by St. Paul VI, to give replace to this civilization of the most powerful, that normalizes war and abominates the difference between us, where the dialogue has no space. I can say, as part of the EOF community, that I want to be on the side of the love. We want to be on the side of the love. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariana. That was great. And yeah, just to retake some words from Pope Francis. Pope Francis invited us to not be afraid. Let's not be afraid of reality, especially. And the fact that we are here talking about this, it shows that we are trying to be brave. And in that regard, I would like to ask you, especially when we talk about inequalities. So, of course, the development of AI right now, one of the challenges is that it's been developed by a capitalist market. So more money, more intelligence, more AI, a new level of capital invested. And I think it's the first time that we see these levels of capital invested into a specific industry. And with this system, we also see that the development is unequal and it impacts us on equity, especially for those in the global south. And my question would be, how can we contribute to equalizing the conditions of those that are more affected, especially when we are aware of our own square meter of privilege or of being more vulnerable as well?
Thank you, Ricardo. Yes, this question is not only related to artificial intelligence. As I said, I think that this process is difficult to digest because it's happening very fast. But with all technologies, as Pope Leo said us, and I truly believe on it, that we have to put purpose on it. If we have to ask ourselves, is this path, is this technology guiding us into integral development, is guiding us to social justice or not? So we have to guide the development and the investments that we are making as governments, national governments, regional governments, to these purposes. So technology is only be part of this process in a good way if the answer is it can be used to reduce inequalities. It can be used to reach the most vulnerable ones, help the most vulnerable ones, to treat disease that are negligented because they are in the global south, they are in the Africa continent, they are people don't mind about it. So for me, this idea of innovation, of technology, and I work with that. I have been working with innovation since the beginning of my academic education. But for me, it's clear each year that technology itself, it's not the answer. Technology, innovation, I don't have a technology optimist, blind optimist anymore. Because I think that the purpose can be totally the opposite. As we are seeing here, as we are discussing here, we can deepen the inequalities. We can make the most vulnerable more vulnerable yet, because they are already sacrifice zones. As we are seeing this transition, the energy transition movement, that it's an imperative, okay, but it seems that there are only one way to do it. So we are going to electrify, we are going to continue to drive our individual cars, but we are not seeing, again, that we are giving the onus to the global south, the people that are living close to mining areas, the people that now with strategic minerals related to data centers and batteries, people are starting to be in this place. This is what already happened, but this is intensifying. I can see here in Brazil that we have a lot of mining, extraction in indigenous communities, in poorer communities, but this is a reality in Latin America and Africa continent. We are seeing this in Argentina, in Bolivia, in Chile, in many places. So for me, we have to fight and not to be afraid to say the truth, that this discourse, that we have to do that, and that has to be this way, it's a built truth. As also Pope Leo says in the Encyclical, because they have the power at the end. So I don't know if I answered you, but I would go through this way to follow what Pope Francis asked us to do.
Great. Thank you very much, Mariana. And now I would like to give the floor to Luigino Bruni. And please, Luigino, now the space is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm so honored and grateful to be here with you. Economy of Francesco is a very reactive, elastic reality that when is called for something important, people, young people arrive. And then this is a very beautiful. Thank you also to the colleagues, to the friends that gave us the honor of your presence. Being the last to speak, I just give you my global evaluation of the Magnifica Humanitas. I had the chance to study it for a few papers, and then I summarize in a few minutes my impression around 3 points. Then let's start. Magnifica Humanitas is a love letter, lettera d'amore, that the Church, through Pope Leo, writes to humanity today. This benevolent gaze upon women and men is the first gift Pope Leo gives to us. Because in its golden ages, the Church indeed loved the world through the charity of the eyes, because the charity of the eyes is one high form of charity, of love, looking upon it with trust and hope. Even the lengthy and the central discourse on artificial intelligence, AI, including its profound and precise anthropological and spiritual guidelines for its use, unfolds within this humanism of hope. Let's read the number 2, the section 2 of the Encyclical. We wish, I quote, we wish to enter into dialogue with all the men and women of our time, with whom we share in the events, questions, and aspirations of humanity. Unquote. This is not an encyclical born of fear of the new. The rerum novarum now are good. are part of our present situation. It is a good situation. It does not condemn our times by placing the church outside humanity, but the Pope gives voice to the hopes, joys, and legitimate concerns of so many people. Then an encyclical that speaks the same loving language of the Vatican II. Therefore, in order to understand Magnifica Humanitas, its tone, its raison d'être, it must be approached not so much in the light of Rerum Novarum of Leo XIII, but of Gaudium et Spes, the Church's other love letter to humanity in the 66, as we know, in another new and difficult era. Then, to me, Magnifica Humanitas is the new Gaudium et Spes. Because the proemio of Gaudium et Spes is very similar to the proemio of Magnifica Humanitas. This very positive, this trusting attitude to humanity. Then a very beautiful, necessary, and important encyclical, at times truly magnificent and prophetic to me, which reveals to us the theology and the heart of Pope Leo. A text not less important than the greatest encyclical of the past. The title, as in many encyclical, is the synthesis and the center of the entire text. Humanity is magnificent. And the all appeals addressed to it are aimed at the safeguarding of this precious magnificence. Second point, one center to my reading of the encyclical, one center of the encyclical is the so-called principle of subsidiarity, that is a classic principle of the social doctrine of the Catholic Church, but the declination, the development, the applications of this principle of subsidiarity is very interesting, applied to artificial intelligence. Why? Because Pope Leo applies the principle of subsidiarity also to the use of words, to the use of parola, the use of logos, verbum. Then let's read that section 100, not by chance, very central section of the encyclical. I quote, when the human word is simulated, quando la parola è simulata, simulated, it does not build a relationship, but a semblance of it. The artificial imitation, I repeat, the artificial imitation of the relationship of care or accompaniment can be very dangerous. What does it mean? This argument, this issue applied to is applied in particular to work, to the economy, to companies. Work is very important in the encyclical. By the way, the expression work is present 71, the item Jesus only 9, Christ 30, but much more work. Work is very central. Then what does it mean to apply this the principle of subsidiarity to words and to work, to the use of language at work in particular? First, work is very important in the encyclical only because the word, the logos, had been a carpenter. And then the importance of work, also in the same biography of Jesus. This subsidiarity means that in crucial human relationships, the human word and heart must not have perfect substitutes. And if we do so, we reduce our dignity, our work, our magnificence. For an example, when a manager has to dismiss a worker, to fire a worker, even if this manager uses algorithms artificial intelligence, but at the end, in the final mile, in the final kilometer, in the final step, their human words must come into play. At the end, we have to speak as human beings, one another, not to use algorithms without any words. And this important words is very much related to the issue of the praise, the laudatio of the limit, il limite, the limitation, the incompleteness of our human condition. If we read session 118 and 119, I quote, "We must remember that human does not flourish in spite of limitation, but often through limitation, because it's precisely in our being limited that there is room for compassion, for sincere concern for the needs of the others, for the generosity that surprises even in the midst of darkness and failure." It's a beautiful passages. And then the third point is about how to use artificial intelligence in our everyday work, because as we know, artificial intelligence reduces our cost, not only, or maybe not mainly financial cost, but our cognitive cost, and simplifies complexity often. But the point is, Homo sapiens do not always welcome reductions in time and cost, because often we like to participate in process. We like the longer, slower way to go home, because we want to look at the trees and at flowers. We don't like always reduction of cost, efficiency. And then artificial intelligence can create an agent that perfectly imitates San Francis of yesterday, but he cannot create a new San Francis, a new Giacomo Leopardi today. That is what we really want, what we really need. Creativity of the first level. And then why? Because there is a dimension of human beings. There is a dimension of human happiness that is typical of humans. Is the desire, because we know from psychology that our happiness depends very much in desire to be desired by another human being. We are a desire desiring other desires that are purely humans, because it's not enough to be desired by dogs and cats. They can help, but it's not enough. We need the human desire for our happiness, at least one. I think faith is also the hope that at least one person in the universe will desire us, that is God. And then this argument about subsidiarity is very important, because up to now, artificial intelligence is anti-subsidiarity. It's actually the opposite. It's really top-down, as Fadi told. It's concentrated in few hands, very few hands. Whereas human intelligence, and artificial, is distributed in 8 billions of heads. Then the biodiversity of human intelligence is very huge. The biodiversity of artificial is very little, if any. And then this is also the way of how market works. If we think about von Hayek lesson, market works using the very small quote piece of intelligence distributed in millions and millions of heads of intelligence of people. Then let's go to conclude. We know that this two biblical icon is very important in this encyclical, the Tower of Babel and the reconstruction of Jerusalem by Nehemiah. For the very beginning to the end, these two are sort of the two axes, X and Y, of the space of the encyclical that is like designed between these two space dimensions. Then that are very important, the reconstruction of Nehemiah, that was a popular, positive reconstruction, good walls, whereas the Tower of Babel is a bad walls, bad edification, a good edification. What is important that if we know that the Tower of Babel arrives in the Genesis after the Arch of Noah, after the flood, because the flood starts, the Noah cycle starts at chapter 10, the Tower of Babel, chapter 11. Because after the flood, after the diluvio, the temptation of communitarianism, the temptation not to be closed, because Babel is also this fear of the diversity, and then to talk one language. And then we know from the Bible, Genesis, that the founder of Babel was Nimrod, that was defined in the Bible as the first powerful on earth. Then the Tower of Babel has to do directly with power, the bad use of power. And then I conclude by reading this legend of Jewish by Ginsberg, that is a comment, a midrash, very old, around the Tower of Babel. I quote, many years were devoted to the construction of the tower. In the eyes of the builders, a brick then became more precious than a human being. If a man fell and died, no one took any notice. But if a brick fell, everyone wept. Pregnant women were not allowed to stop work even when in labor. They gave birth whilst making bricks. Then this beautiful letter of love of Popleo to humanity, because based on the hope that humanity, despite everything, is magnificent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luigino. I would like to ask one question regarding regarding narrative capital. How can we cultivate the value of narrative capital of the human words in the face of the risk of being replaced by digital words? If you could give us some light on that, we would be grateful.
Yes, we cannot. I'm not an expert on artificial intelligence, and I can say maybe very trivial words, but in my opinion, the arrival of artificial intelligence into literature, into narratives, into writings, in writings books, I think is also an increase of competition. What does it mean, increase of competition? If you want to survive, if you are a writer, if you are a poet, if you want to survive in the era of artificial intelligence, you must be very, very smart. Because now the competition is also very strong, because the middle level, I would say, the not very original writers probably would be substituted by artificial intelligence for writing these popular yellow romanzi, gialli, of these very, I'd say, easy writing books for one train trip. This love story that are written already with the technique that are very similar to the artificial intelligence. But for a new Giacomo Leopardi, for a new Oscar Wilde, for a new Dante Alighieri, of course, there is not artificial intelligence up to now are not competitive. Then I think is a call for using our specificity as human beings, that is creativity, and in particular is spirituality, because up to now, machine has not a spirit. They can simulate the spirit, but spirituality, spirit, soul, this kind of dimensions are typical human. Then if we use this kind of dimension, it's difficult to be simulated by machines. And then I have no fear for that, because we can understand what is really human today, and then to go further on that direction.
Thank you very much, Luigino. And in our program, we had a space for question and answers, but given the time and the richness of the conversation, we might not have that space. But we would kindly ask you that if you have any questions, please share them via the chat, and that way we will make sure to share them with those that have been part of our wonderful event today. So I would like to thank you for being here, to thank our panelists for being open to be here with us as well. And as we bring this event to a close, let us remember that the profound ideas we have shared today cannot remain confined to this space. They must become actions in our daily lives. In Magnifica Humanitas, Pope Leo calls us to be witnesses and not actors. And we can see that in one of these paragraphs, especially the one that I especially liked was 125, in which he invites us to see the martyrs of everyday life, those who care for, educate, accompany, and comfort without fanfare, such as parents, nurses, doctors, volunteers, and those who remain alongside an elderly person or an outcast. Their testimony demonstrates that goodness does not advance automatically, but requires the perseverance, memory, and interior conversion necessary to begin anew. So that's what we are called here today, to begin anew in this era, in this process of change that we are experiencing. We don't need to wait for the structures of power to shift, but to become catalysts for change, for justice and hope from each of our realities. Again, thank you very much, all of you. For those of you that are not yet part of our community, we invite you to reach out through our social media platforms at Francesco Economy. Please also reach out to the local hubs of the Economy of Francesco. The community is organized in more than 50 local hubs around the world. Reach out to any of those part of the General Assembly. You can also reach out to our website. And please be attentive, because we will try to have more events like this. And yeah, thank you very much for your time, for your patience, and for the love for doing this. Thank you very much.